spending additional city monies on how we made the decision on who would provide insurance. At the time I was called into the mayor's office, I told him, I said, I felt this is what precipitated it, and that he was looking for a fall guy, and I was that guy that got selected.
Now, you understand that the motion that was made by the city council and passed appears to only terminate you as the city administrator and not as the chief of police.
I didn't know because I was never received any communications regarding my status as chief.
On January the 20th, did you ask the mayor if he was terminating you or suspending you as public administrator? What effect, if any, that had on your duties as the chief of police?
He said at that time that I was suspended from my duties as chief.
And since that's not a termination, you understand that the thunder that we were gonna offer today as it relates to section 106, 273 is not something that the council really wants to hear, and probably that's correct.
I understand that.
Okay. Is there any other information or evidence that you want to present to the council that I've failed to bring before them?
No, I don't believe so, sir.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Other than the meeting on January the 20th with the mayor, has there ever been any other allegations made to you by anyone, whether they're a supervisor or not, that your services to the city of Louisiana as the city administrator have been deficient or not acceptable?
No, sir, there is nothing in my personnel file. I've never been and as the mayor is my supervisor, there's another portion in the employee handbook that states that it is the duty of every supervisor to discuss improper or inadequate performance with the employee in order to correct the deficiencies and to avoid the need to exercise disciplinary action. Again, under Section F, it speaks of disciplinary action to be progressive in nature. The supervisor will discuss with the employee improper and inadequate performance in order to correct deficiencies and to avoid the need to exercise disciplinary action. This talk will be documented, the date will be noted, and the employee and supervisor will sign this document. No such documents exist in my personnel file.
Now, Bob, tonight, what are you asking the city council to do?
I would like my name and my reputation restored. I don't believe that, I believe it, even if you did overturn it, I think it would be a difficult situation for me to go back and work with Bart. My request would be that I be paid my appointed salary until the end of the fiscal year on May 31st. And I would be more than happy then to tender my resignation as city administrator. I can be removed, but I would be more than happy. I went so far as to invest in a home. Just now moved into it within the last 4 months. I had every intention of finishing my career out here. I would continue on as in the capacity of chief of police, and basically that's my request.
Thank you. That concludes our presentation.
Thank you. Is it appropriate that I would cross-examine or ask?
If you would like, it certainly is appropriate.
And I'm a little
Matter of fact, let me say that I think it would be appropriate if any one of the council members or the city attorney or you wish to ask him a question, I think it's totally appropriate.
So, the part that I get a little confused on, and I would ask for guidance, would be, where it becomes cross-examined versus just simply that I have some questions for Bob as well.
Well, let's just call it questioning.
Yeah, let's just start with
Yeah.
questions.
Okay.
Bob and I already talked about that,
Okay.
and we agreed that it's something that we
Sure.
just refer to as questions.
So why don't I start, and then if council has some questions or wants to follow up, they can. Mr. Jenne, would you characterize and I have the transcripts here, and I'm gonna say this in a way that I hope I don't have to actually read them verbatim, but, would you agree that the message that is made in these three statements on the May committee meeting, the July committee meeting, and the July council meeting are rather cursory in nature and reflect that the project is well in hand and everything's going as planned and?
No, I was asked specifically by Councilman Carter at that time to explain all of the projects and what the related costs were supposed to be.
Okay, then I guess would it be appropriate that I would enter these transcripts?
Sure.
In? Okay. And I'll go ahead and read them. The May 2014 Water Committee meeting, the transcript, this is the entire piece, anything relating to LT two. And you've entered the videos, so this will correspond. Mr. Jenne says, in working on the LT2 project, which has been completed, we have an extension until October 2015. The cartridge study has been approved, so it is just a matter of getting everything put in. So we may have to seek SRF funding on the LT2 project. Tim, Mr. Carter asks, please clarify us the acronyms and stuff for us, please. Mr. Jenne says LT2 is long-term drinking water enhancement, dictate and was put forth by the EPA and adopted for all the states. And it basically, what it does is it establishes stricter standards for getting rid of disinfection byproducts such as cryptosporidium and trilohalomethanes that I've hit you in the past with before. Ms. Lewis says those ugly letters that everyone gets. Mr. Jenne says, oh yeah, so, but this should rectify the situation. And then Mr. Carter changes the subject to discuss water rate adjustments that he wanted to propose. So in the total of the May 2014 meeting, it appears to me, and would you concur, that the sum total of any concern about funding is the statement, so we may have to seek SRF funding on the LT2 project.
Yes.
And then in July of 2014, well, actually, why don't I proceed with another little piece that happens in between these two meetings. Do you have that memo from the engineer? Thank you. So in June, so between the May committee meeting and the July committee meeting, in June, and I'll enter this in as well, this is a memorandum from Cleaninger. It's to the mayor and city council, copy to Mr. Jenne. And in this memorandum, it specifically says, among other things, Bob Jenne will be determining financing. And it says, this type of timeline does not afford the city the opportunity to go to the voters for a bond issue for financing.
That was because, if you look, there is an email from Mark Ross stating that we were originally supposed to have been put on the 2014 intended use plan, which would have given us plenty of time to get SRF funding. However, there was a process error between Klinger and MDNR, and I have that
Okay.
with me.
Okay, so we can agree that what we're being told is that a bond issue is not going to fund LT two. And clearly, the bond issue in May was what you were suspecting we were going to use to.
The bond
fund.
issue was trying to consolidate all projects because we didn't have enough in capital improvement funding to finance all of
Did that
them.
I'm sorry.
So it included, we were going to try and include LT2 because we didn't have all the funding in there. And for the booster station.
So the bond that was eventually proposed, and the SRF funding that you mentioned in May was meant to address, in addition to other things, the LT2 project.
Yes.
And then, I'll continue on with the transcripts of the relevant portions from the meeting that correspond to the video. So I'm at the July Water Committee meeting. There's some discussion about LT two, there's about 2 pages. It lasted somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 minutes, I think. But the part about the financing is where Mr. Carter says, I got one question, Bob. What line item is this coming out of? Is it coming out of our bond issue? Mr. Jenne says we have an LT two line item in there. Now, my understanding is that, so the only funding issue that's discussed in the May Water Committee meeting was pertaining to the actual engineering portion, and that
Correct.
did come out of a line item.
Correct.
So in May, we're talking about funding LT two with SRF funds, which require a bond issue. In June, we received a letter that says a bond issue isn't even possible at this point. You indicate that you knew that because it should have been done, it would have had to have been done earlier, and it didn't get
The
done.
bond issue came up as a result of the booster station project. Because I had applied for and gotten part of the phase, if you recall, I got a phase 1 approval from MDNR. That's when we put it out for RFQs, and that's when MECO came in. That's when Max Middendorf showed up at the meeting that night with Gail. So the bond issue would have been more, while it could have been used for those other things, it was more so for the booster station.
Your contention now is that the bond issue could have been used to cover the LT two project.
Because we didn't have all the funding.
It could be used because we didn't have funding?
We didn't have the total amount of funding necessary in capital
Let
improvement.
me re-ask the question, rephrase the question. Is it your contention that a bond issue introduced, as you introduced it, could be used to pay for any portion of the LT two project?
Yes,
Okay. Even though the June letter from the engineer says that's not possible?
well, that was because I didn't get the other letter from him, the email. It was because of the problem with the intended use plan debacle. Because it was supposed to have been on 2014.
I agree that to do it with a bond issue, it would have required having happened substantially earlier, but that's not what we're talking about. We're saying, you just indicated that you believe that the bond issue could have paid for some of the LT two project. And that would be different than what the memorandum from Cleaninger says. Specifically, the timeline does not afford the city the opportunity to go to the voters for a bond issue for financing.
Right.
So are you indicating that?
May I help clarify here?
Sure,
I
thank you.
think the problem is, he's saying it could have been used, Klinger's saying the timeline was the problem, not the purpose, but the timeline. So when the deadline was extended, what, a year, I think it was? I think that-
Extended to October
I think that may have
20.
opened up a new opportunity. I think that's where, you're saying, or you're referring to Klinger's statement, and they're looking at the timeline being inadequate, when I think what he's saying is that the funding could potentially be used if the timeline could be met.
Okay, so if the timeline, I don't even know how to handle that. I really, I'm at a loss, because.
Well, I think the original timeline was
Major-
October 14, right?
Correct.
Okay, and I think when they wrote that letter, I think they were saying,
No,
unless I misunderstand.
this letter came in June of 2014.
Right.
After the May meeting where Mr. Jenne suggests that SRF funding, meaning bond issue, could be used. And this letter comes after that meeting by a month, and it says that the timeline does not afford the city the opportunity to go to the voters for a bond issue to finance.
That's because they didn't get it on the 2014 intended use plan.
Okay, they didn't do something and it couldn't be used. But then so the only comment on the July committee meeting is relating not to funding through any bond issue, it's related to funding
Relating to
engineering.
the contract
Right.
costs.
So this isn't about constructing the LT2 in that meeting, and that's the only funding conversation in that meeting. The final meeting, transcript, in July at the full council meeting, simply approves that funding through the line item for the engineering. But neither of the last two meetings, as far as I can tell, indicate funding or discuss funding for the construction of, that's
You and
necessary
I
for the
discussed
LT2.
it though.
Okay, well, you'll have to ask me about that, I guess. I do not recall discussing that with you. What I do recall is relying on statements like, so we may have to seek SRF
No,
funding. on
because
the
you
LT2
specifically
project.
had asked me what the cost of the LT2 project was gonna be. And I had told you, Mark Ross had stated somewhere in the area of $362,000,
I think it's $650,000.
or 650, because we had 362 in capital improvement funds that could be used towards that project.
Okay. My contention, and I don't know how to express this, is that the discussion in the meetings was highly limited in terms of anything relating to financing of
Well,
construction.
let me ask a question. I respect your right to question anyone else, but if you're gonna start now giving us information, I think you ought to be under oath, and I ought to have an
I agree.
opportunity to examine you.
I agree.
We'll get to that. This is the mayor's question, so this is it.
But I
It
completely.
sounded like a statement rather than a question.
It was, I erred. That's correct. I'm not a lawyer. I just play one city council apparently. Which I'd rather not. Okay, and then the last meeting that you brought up that I'd like to discuss, this is the special council meeting where we had Steve Gale and Mark Ross and
Max
engineer
Middendorf, yes.
right, which certainly was the kind of final catalyst to my loss of confidence in your performance. Because we have statements, well, let's see, how do I put this in a question? You indicated that this meeting shows and illustrates that you were on top of funding for this project, correct?
I knew what the costs of the projects were gonna be, yes.
Did you know how we were going to fund those costs?
Yes.
And how was that? How were we going to fund those costs?
Part of it was supposed to have come out of capital improvements. And then we would have had to appropriate additional funding from reserves.
That's brand new to me. So your thought at the time, okay, so the proposal to have a $3 million bond issue, which you've indicated was supposed to help cover the LT2.
What we were looking for is trying to get the city the best and lowest payment possible to complete these projects. That's why you go SRF.
I think I've illustrated my point. I'll move on from the transcripts, to the handbook. The ordinance that's specific to the city administrator, would you believe, in your estimation, as a past city attorney, understanding the law, would you agree that the ordinance specific to your job supersedes the employee handbook?
Would I say the ordinance supersedes it? No, the employee handbook goes along with the ordinance.
Does the employee handbook not say that that I don't have the exact language, but it indicates that it does not present anything that's in conflict? Let me just speak to the removal of the city administrator.
I'm not denying anything about the removal of the city administrator. You're well within your right to do so.
And what do I need in order to do that?
You would have needed to provide me with notice. I was given no notice.
So I don't see where that is in here, and you can point it out, I'll read it to you, you can help me find it.
Well, it's not in the ordinance. It's not in the ordinance. I will agree with you on that.
The ordinance, so would you agree that the ordinance states that the city administrator shall serve at the pleasure of the mayor?
Correct.
And it
I do
indicates
agree with that.
That the city administrator
I'm not
can be
disputing that.
removed at will, with or without cause, that no cause is necessary, right? That's what the ordinance says?
Well, that's what the ordinance says, but the employee handbook says something totally contrary.
And you grab that, let's look at that, the handbook. Section F, disciplinary actions. It was kind of convenient to only talk about part of section F. Section 2, which is grounds for action, I believe, and you'll just affirm that you are in agreement with this. Section 2, grounds for action. The following are declared to be grounds for demotion, suspension, or removal of any employee. This list is non-exclusive, and any such ground, including those not specifically mentioned herein, may be grounds for immediate removal. Immediate removal. And then B, as a specific example, is acts of incompetence. Would you agree that there are?
You never said any, you never gave me a grounds.
Okay. I'll save that for, I guess, when I testify or give a narrative, but I believe I did. Okay. Okay, that's the cross.
Does the council have any?
Well, I've got more questions for Bob.
Oh,
Complete. Mr. Jenne, is it an essential duty of the city administrator to bring recommendation for funding on major capital improvement projects like the LT2 project to the mayor and city council?
Yes,
Were you told by the engineer in June that it was too late for a bond issue and SRF funding?
not that I recall, because Mark and Steve had both talked about it.
Yet, here's the memorandum that says timeline from Klinginger, from Mark. It says
Again.
timeline does not afford the city the opportunity to go to the voters for bond issues. So I'll ask again, were you told by the engineer in June that it was too late for a bond issue and SRF funding?
Again, it relates back to that intended use plan date and the mistake that was made by MDNR.
You're saying that this memo is not, that says Ray Water Plant LT2 compliance is including other projects in that statement? I'll move on.
Well, let him respond to it.
Okay, sure.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, you were gonna respond, you have a response to make to that?
I'm trying to find that.
You take your time, you make your
Email
response.
from Clinner. it says. It says the sewer collection system work was supposed to be done on the 2014 SRF IUP, and something got screwed up between SRF and MDNR. They found their mistake and they corrected it, and now it is on the IUP.
So that's in reference to an entirely different project, the sewer
Correct.
project out on LT two. That, if I'm understanding correctly?
He said, it also indicates the LT2 project was never discussed about going SRF because we did not have water bonds.
Right, we couldn't go SRF because we did not have
Because we
water
did not
bonds.
have water bonds.
Correct. And then, did you subsequent to the memo from Clean Air indicating that the timeline does not afford the city the opportunity to go to voters for a bond issue of financing, did you subsequently propose a $3 million bond issue be passed along with its related SRF funding in order to cover the LT2 project? And other projects,
And other projects.
but including the LT2
Yes,
project?
and other projects, yes.
Okay. Could your proposed funding through that bond initiative have possibly funded the solution that covered the LT2? Could it possibly funded the LT2 project, given its deadline?
Well, and that's what was brought out at the meeting, and then that's what Mark said, it could not be done in that time frame. And that's why we had all of the people there to explain
Well,
the
that-
situation.
What's your recollection of why that meeting was called and who called it?
You called it, you wanted it,
Why do you recall why I called that meeting?
because we wanted to explore how we were gonna pay for all these projects.
You do not recall the conversation that I had with you, that I was not satisfied with the explanation you gave me for funding? And then I, that evening, called the bond writer, and subsequent to
Yes, you
that,
did
set up
state
this,
that.
this meeting, because what you were telling me did not match what my understanding of possible funding solutions was?
Okay,
That was
I'll
the-
agree to that. I'm not contesting that.
Okay. That's the end of my questions. Does council have any questions for Mr. Jenne? Ms. Ruffin?
Mr. Jenne stated that he would like to reword your statement if you came back, what you would accept, what you wanted from the council.
I would ask that I be paid my appointed, the salary that I was provided when I was appointed as city administrator is an appointed position on a yearly basis. After that year, had the mayor said, Bob, I'm not confident in your abilities or whatever, I'm going to remove you, then I would have understood, it would have given me the time frame, to start looking for another position or some other work. As I said, pay me the salary I was intended to make for that appointed period, then they would have my resignation immediately, if you want, as city administrator, because I don't think I could go back to work for the mayor in that capacity.
You made a reference to being the police chief.
I would like to continue on being the police chief in full duty capacity.
With the same salary.
Not with the same salary, with an adjusted salary as to what Chief Hughes was making at the time of his service to the city.
Okay, so are you requesting your full salary plus the salary from the chief?
No,
or
no,
just the
no.
difference?
In the time until May 31st, I would keep my current salary. After May 31st, that salary would be readjusted to a salary that of chief of police, solely as chief of police.
In the meantime, between now and May 31st, what is your position, your desire for your position as chief of police?
Just to be in that position.
And what about the pay? Would your regular pay compensate you for that position?
The pay I'm making $78,000 annually now.
Right.
That would end May 31st.